So what I'm going to do first before we kind of get going is I'll introduce myself briefly. Andrea and Aaron, I'd ask you all to do the same so everybody is familiar with you and your organization. And then we'll get going into some of the questions that we've pre-prepared for your viewing pleasure. So my name is Don Alexander. I'm the president and managing director, if you can see above my shoulder, of a company called Genecoda, which focuses as a boutique professional and executive search firm that focuses on the life sciences industry. So we help connect outstanding firms in the life sciences sector with various functional executives who help really bring game-changing products to market and subsequently treatments to patients. So that's what we do in a nutshell, and I'll invite perhaps Andrea, if you could introduce yourself.
My name is Andrea Johnson, and I'm the Director of Human Resources for Kymanox. We are based in Morrisville, and we're a professional services company with focus really on project delivery, and our clients range from biotech, pharmaceutical, medical device, and combination product companies, and we really provide support in a variety of different areas, ranging from quality to regulatory to engineering, validation, really a variety of different services. We have over 100 employees between our employee and our contractor network, and as I mentioned, our corporate office is based here in Morrisville. We have an office in Boston, an office in Chicago, and an office in New Jersey as well. And I lead the HR and talent function at Kymanox.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrea. Aaron?
Oh, I forgot to let the chickens out. I'm going to do that.
Aaron Turner. I work in talent acquisition at RTI. RTI is a non-for-profit research institute. We have about 6,000 employees. We have, I think, 14 domestic offices that we don't use and 35 offices around the world. I think that's it. And yeah, we do a lot of research, but we also do data science, survey work that all kind of feed in together.
Fantastic, Aaron. Thanks for that. And again, welcome to you both, and thanks for being on the call this afternoon. So we'll go ahead and get started off with some questions that we've given some time to think about. And the first question we'll start with, and I'll just give a brief preface of my view of this, but I would invite Andrea and Aaron to contribute to this as well. And that the question is what's really going on in hiring overall. And this is, of course, as it pertains to the life sciences sector. So I'm going to attempt to answer that, at least from my point of view, in a couple of frameworks. One is, and again, sorry, I have to put a plug in for the company briefly. We produce a report called the Life Sciences Pulse Report as a company, and we do that on a quarterly basis. And in a little bit, I'll put up the links to this information. If you're so inclined, you can go in and grab the report. But what the report does is actually, the Pulse Report is, it measures the number of advertisements in the life sciences sector on a quarter-over-quarter basis within the United States. And we subdivide that into three different categories: pharmaceutical medicine, manufacturing, which would be prototypical names like Pfizer and GlaxoSmithKline. We also look at the research, testing, and medical lab sector, which would be names like Quest and Laboratory Corporation of America. And finally, we look at the medical device segment of the market, which would be names like, say, Stryker or a Medtronic. So we compile that data together into a report that helps us to analyze over a 3-year period of time the relative strength of the industry based on the advertisements that employers are actually posting. So this data is basically screen scraped from the internet. Supposedly it grabs all jobs that are open in the United States at any one point in time. And it's a powerful tool in that way, the data source. So referring to our Q2 report briefly with that introduction, we did note that the second quarter of this year was down in hiring across the life sciences sector by about 12% overall. Now that's on a year-over-year basis, or as compared to Q2 of 2019. We also, when we looked at the subsector components, we saw that the research testing medical labs was down about 10%. The medical device and equipment side of the equation, which was actually down about 33%. So that was a pretty big hit. And pharmaceutical medicine and manufacturing, big names like GSK and Pfizer, they basically stayed roughly about the same, which was a very good thing because they're a very large component of the overall market. So what we saw again was a 12% cumulative decline with variations depending on what segment of the market that a firm was actually in. So we think about these numbers as being kind of challenging, but the other thing I'd finally add to sum this part up is that if we compare that to, say, even the healthcare industry itself, was down about 33% in Q2 of this year versus the same quarter last year. So the life sciences industry, even though it was down, it still was relatively robust by way of comparison to other segments of the economy. The other thing I'll briefly point out is we did a workshop this past week, and I'll put the link to that online if you'd like to go and see it. But we surveyed in primary data about 100 executives in the life sciences industry. Most of these were C-suite level executives. And the summary data from that information was pretty interesting. We found that companies will likely be hiring in the third quarter, back into the third quarter, into the fourth quarter of this year. We had about half the companies tell us that they were not, in fact, hiring at this time. About half said, of course, that they were. And, COVID-19 itself caused a relatively even distribution of companies that faced a downturn in their business with those that were in fact busier, or where there was actually no impact to their, to their business. Again, I'll post some of the links to this information so that you can look at it in far more detail. But at this point, I'd like to turn it over and see Aaron and Andrea what observations you might have had about the market overall.
Yeah, I don't know, Aaron, if you want to go, or I can jump in.
Okay.
So I would say Kymanox is in a little bit of a unique position because we are a professional services company, and so I would say the first couple of months after things started shutting down in March, maybe were a little bit slow for us. A lot of the work that we do on site, like validation work and quality audits and those kinds of things, certainly slowed down because facilities weren't open, we weren't able to travel. But over the last couple of months, we really have started to see an uptick in some of the larger pharmaceutical companies and device companies who aren't able to hire and add to their own headcount, or coming to companies like us at Kymanox to fill some of the positions or help with some of the project work that they still need to get done, but they don't have the approval to hire their end. So from our perspective, things have actually really been picking up for us the last couple of months. We've continued to hire, although it's certainly been a little bit slower, and we've been much more intentional in the roles that we hire. We've still hired a handful of people over the course of the last few months. So, so we're still moving forward on some positions that we have open.
Great.
Our situation is a little different too. We work in infectious disease and public health, so the COVID didn't really slow us down a lot, although I will say early on, where everyone was worried about appropriations, about 85–90% of our work comes from the government, so wondering what they were going to do and how money was going to be treated. It slowed us down initially. When it started, we were heavy in kind of early career hiring, where you hire people who aren't going to start for a couple months. So some people thought it would be over by June, July, which is when these people were starting. So gave us time to ramp up and understand how to do virtual interviews a little bit better. And then it kind of smacked us in the face, realizing we really didn't know how to onboard that well virtually and how hard it was. But business hasn't slowed down. Hiring has, stayed steady, and it's actually picked up some because of the function of the work that we do. Some of the hiring slowed down because of timidness from some of the managers who were afraid of what was happening in industry and how that might look like. They didn't want to bring on new staff and then be told they may have to furlough or get rid of existing staff. We have some parts of our business where we do surveys that feed into some of the research, which actually are door-to-door surveys, which were obviously affected pretty heavily. We're employee of record for these, but most of those are part-time people. So we've tried to use them on other stuff when we can, but overall hiring hasn't slowed too much, but it's trickled a little bit because people are just more concerned. We're a research and analytics company, so we overanalyze what's going on a bit much and overthink the fact that we still need to be doing work. Our awards have been pretty heavy, again, because some of it's wrapped around COVID and research related to the next pandemics to make sure it doesn't happen again and we get ahead of it. But overall, I think it'll start to pick back up as people get used to this new norm, and everyone, including the government, has been more open about virtual work for everyone.
That's great, Aaron and Andrea. Thank you both for that. When COVID started, I'm going to deviate off script a little bit here if I can, but when COVID started back in the, I guess towards the tail end of February, really the beginning of March time frame up through now, as you both of your companies were in that 50% category that are actually still hiring, maybe on a slower basis, but still a net gain, if you will, in number of employees. And so I was kind of wondering, as you all got started out with that in the earlier months in March and whatnot, maybe even into April, how did you contend with the interview process, and maybe what changed for you during that time frame? Were you doing more video interviews? And Aaron, you touched on onboarding. I'm just kind of curious about that pattern and how that developed.
Yeah, thankfully for us, we're so multidisciplinary, and we were 35% telecommuters even before COVID. So we had a good population of our staff who were so used to interviewing virtually that they were good at it. The ones who hadn't been as used to doing it were kind of paralyzed by it. So we spent a lot of the first couple weeks putting together crazy documents on how to interview virtually, from stuff about lighting to looking into the camera. And I mean, stuff that you would think is common for a lot of us who are on these calls normally all the time, but for some of the staff who weren't comfortable with them, that was a lot of time was just making them comfortable doing things that seem second nature to some of us. But a lot of the staff was already doing a lot of that, so they were comfortable with it, so we could focus on the areas where people needed a little bit help.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I would say we were a little bit different. A lot of our interviews tended to be face-to-face. Even if people were in some of our remote offices, they would still, are interviewing for roles in our remote offices, they would have the opportunity to meet with employees in those offices. So, luckily in January, we actually implemented an applicant tracking system, which for those of you who don't know what that is, it allows you to gather resumes, post jobs in one simple, easy place, schedule interviews, gather feedback. So luckily we had done that. I didn't have a crystal ball, but at the time, but I'm glad that we did implement that applicant tracking system, because I think we would have been in a much different place if we hadn't had that in place. So, we also, similar to what Aaron said, we had to give people some etiquette, provide some interviewing guides on, how to do Zoom interviews and those kinds of things. So, we certainly had to adjust. And I think it makes it much more difficult from the candidate perspective, right? Because you have to let the candidate get a good sense for, in our case, the Kymanox culture, and make sure that you have well thought out job descriptions, and so that people understand, what it is that they're potentially getting into, because they're never going to set foot in your office. And so they're not going to get a sense from that, from a live interview. So you really have to make that known in a video interview setting, and make sure that they have a full picture with all the people that they meet with.
That's such a good point, Andrea. It was interesting when we made our very first placement with a client. I think it was in the March timeframe, actually. kind of, I call it sight unseen, because so many of our clients, especially at a senior level, they want to see, the human being, and not on the Zoom, not the Zoom kind, if you will, in person. And so it dawned on me how much many companies were having to change their processes. Aaron, fortunately for you, you all were already fairly accustomed to that, but many of our clients were not accustomed to that really at all. And they had to really I guess, wrap their arms around the idea that they weren't going to necessarily be able to interview people in person. And I think that for some of them, it took a period of time to really develop that. And some of them, may have even put off some hiring as a result. But then we had another gentleman who was hired over, I'll call it hired over a picnic table. He finally did meet the client in person at a social distance. And we found ourselves asking, candidates also for clients that weren't still interested in in-person interviews, making sure that the candidates were okay with that prospect as well, given the coronavirus scenario. So thank you for all of that guidance. So how are you all planning for 2021? Is it different than, say, 2019 or even this year? In terms of not only the hiring, but how you're going about the hiring, I guess the new normal with all that background. How might it be different from times past?
Andrea, I'll let you go first.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think for us, I don't know that it's really anything different than what we've been doing over the last several months, kind of what we've become accustomed to. Certainly things like kind of beyond recruiting, I consider onboarding kind of a part of recruiting as well. So that's certainly something that we are starting to focus more on now as we start to hire people over the next several months. Now, how do we onboard them better remotely? Because that's something that we weren't really set up for. I think we were positioned well to do the actual recruiting piece of it, but in terms of like the onboarding and kind of training new hires, and that's something that we've started to focus on over the last, I'd say, month or two, and something that we'll continue to focus on into 2021. And how do we train people? How do we hire? We have an academy program where we hire recent college graduates who go through a 2-year rotational program at Kymanox. And so, a lot of what they get is really on the job training, right? Where they're shadowing more experienced people, more experienced employees, either at client sites or at the company. And so now we've got to try and recreate that virtually. So that'll be a focus for us over the next several months and into 2021.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think for us, 2021 looks a little bit different because of COVID. How do you get people and convince them they actually have to come back to an office? Since we've done this for a year and it's worked, why do I have to come see you in person? It's easier. And, with the diversity, equity, and inclusion, you have different ways, and you're being more cognizant of who you're hiring, why you're hiring, how you're hiring. So it's made us take a step back and look at that. So we've got a lot more behavioral type interview parts to the technical parts of the interviews. I think, again, since we're multidisciplinary, it's going to be key that we get people involved and make introductions. It's hard for people to meet people they don't know. So making sure that they're more collaborative with the larger group of teams will be easier to understand where the needs are as they come up. But I don't think it'll change a whole lot. Thankfully, we had implemented some of that moving forward. I'm hoping a lot of it doesn't change. Hopefully we start hiring a little bit quicker, because as we all know, there's unemployment goes up. It doesn't mean that the good candidates are going to sit around and wait as long.
No, that's a really good point, Aaron. And the market is expected to, from all of our data, to start to really increase towards the tail end of this year. So that's absolutely right. In terms of I guess from our point of view, what we're trying to do is continue to segment the market and focus on market segments and areas, obviously, that appear to be hiring, which should come as no surprise. And again, I'll put up those links from some of our findings earlier. But we've also drafted a bit of a guide that I can share later on that is a COVID. It's basically how COVID has changed and continues to change the recruitment landscape. And I think it goes to a lot of the points that have already been made in terms of Andrea with onboarding and things of that nature. But dealing with the various workforce needs, things like remote interviewing and onboarding, and just really building relationships to a large extent on a remote basis. And I am curious, if you don't mind me asking the two of you all as well. I mean, do you feel like that the employees that you do talk to that are all on a remote basis right now, do you get the sense that, a fair amount of those individuals want to come back into the office environment? Aaron, you were kind of touching on that. And I've seen read different things about this, but I'm curious, do people want to get back into a work environment, or are they very comfortable right now? I would say no. On the other hand, I want to stay home and work all the time from home. What are you sensing with those aspects?
I would say for our employees, it's a little bit of both. So we actually opened up our office back in June as entirely optional for employees who wanted to. We have a lot of young employees, and so a lot of them live alone and or have a roommate and maybe wanted just a place to go to kind of break the monotony of being home. So we wanted to do that for those employees who really needed that. I would say we've had some employees who take advantage of it, and some employees who don't. Now that school has started, we have employees who are home with their kids because kids are home, and so they're juggling that. They're juggling work and trying to be teachers, and so that's certainly a challenge. What we're trying to do as a company is continue to be flexible and understanding, while also knowing that we have a business to run, and so. We certainly have a level of flexibility, but we still also have the expectation that, you have a job to do, and certainly we'll be as flexible as we can, but, every situation is different. And so, I don't know when we'll open our office or make it a requirement for people to come in. I think that probably will be a long time away, and maybe never. I really don't have a definitive answer for that. Or just kind of like everyone else, just kind of playing it by ear and polling our employees and talking to our employees and seeing what they're comfortable with and trying to take those things into advisement as we make decisions.
Yeah, I know my family is ready for me to go back to the office just to get me out of here. But I think you'll have a little bit of both. I know personally I want to go to the office, but I want to go there for the camaraderie, to get to meet people, and the people who aren't comfortable going, you can't force them to go to work. It just makes a bad situation worse. So like Andrea said, I think it'll be a long time until we go fully back when people are comfortable to go sit in a cafeteria together and talk. And do I want to go back and sit in an office with a mask on a Zoom call with other people in the office? To me, that's pointless, even though I don't like sitting at home all day, every day. There are people who have no interest in ever going back, and then you have to deal with them like, hey, I was able to do it for a year. How are you telling me my job has to be in the office? It wasn't for the last year. And, managers are going to have to make that decision. And I tell my team all the time, for us to do our job the right way, we need to be in the office some, because we have to learn the people that we're supporting. We have to be there for the support, but I think each person's going to be a little bit different, and my reasons for them being in the office probably don't exist if no one else is in the office. So I don't know how we're going to do it. I don't know when it's going to happen, but I think once we get past that, and people's thoughts are going to change once it's a little more safe out there too.
That's great. Thinking about that a little bit further, Aaron and Andrea as well. I mean, does the idea that we're in this virtual world now to a large extent, or almost to 100% extent, I suppose, and maybe migrating back to some office-related work. But the idea that does the idea that your workforce, in essence, is being done on a remote basis, does that transfer over to the idea that you might be able to recruit from areas, say, that may not be your corporate headquarters? I mean, Aaron, I know that, and Andrea too, I think that you all have different locations, but the notion that, where one lives, is that becoming less important? I guess that's really the question.
I think certainly when you look at demographics of geographics, you can get a more diverse workforce if you don't have them set in specific office areas. Some managers aren't comfortable with that, but yes, it makes it a lot easier and more flexible. And I think you'll see it with some of the big companies who don't send people back. If you work for a job and you're in Santa Clara or out there and they tell you can work remote, do you think they're going to be paying you the higher percentage for where you live if you're not going into the office? I think there's going to be different ways companies look at these kind of things, and it could be a huge cost savings if you don't have to have brick and mortar buildings where everyone are going into. But I think it's going to cause issues either way you go. But I think it would open up who you can recruit, especially in specialized roles where there's not a whole lot of people that can do them. If I don't have to have you come to North Carolina and you can sit in Seattle or Wisconsin, it's probably going to be easier for me to close the deal. But overall, I think that would make it a lot easier to recruit whoever you want from wherever you want.
Andrea, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in our case, because a lot of our employees do tend to travel to client sites, and they could be really based anywhere in the U.S. I mean, I think that's kind of the approach we've tended to take, really in at least the last couple of years at Kymanox, where it's really about finding the right person and the right talent, and where they're based. Isn't as big of a deal, I guess. So I mean, we have employees. I mentioned the offices that we have, but we have employees in I think 10 or 12 states outside of those office locations that I mentioned. So we've done that to some degree, and I think that could continue to be a trend that we look at.
I think, Don, the other thing is important when you do have them traveling to clients or customer sites, who's paying for that travel? So it could have cost, line items where different expenses are coming out of. But I think as long as you're ahead of that and you're thoughtful to that before it happens, I think it's easy to travel anywhere you need to go. We found in this, with less people traveling, I can get a hold of a lot more people who before were traveling so much I could never find them.
Gotcha. That's great. That's a great overview. So again, I want to thank Aaron and Andrea in our, I guess, in our formal Q&A, and now really want to turn to open it up to everybody else who's on the call for questions that you may have. Feel free to type those, I guess, into the chat box. Gerald, is that the best way to do that? Or I guess unmic yourself if you want to, and go ahead and ask the question, and we'll look forward to entertaining those.
Yeah, so please put the questions in the chat, or just say I have a comment, and then I'll ask you to unmute at this time. So that's how we'll do it. So if you have a question for Andrea or Don or Aaron, please let me know, or you can do a reaction and raise your hand. I'm going to go ahead and do a spontaneous poll. No, I'll do the poll later. Sorry, I already have polls ready. So yeah, if you have a question, just do a reaction, either a thumbs up or the surprise face to let me know you want to do a question. So I know one question I have to start off is, speaking to a couple of clients, we've heard of unexpected expenses coming up on the budget this year. One of them was COVID testing people in the office on a regular basis, like every week. And I think, Aaron, you brought it up, diversity and inclusion training. How much outside of, how much are you actually thinking what percentage of the marketplace do you think is going to have to adjust their budgets? I mean, those two positions, those two needs alone cost the company $500,000. So what do you think, how many companies do you think can actually afford $500,000 for those two kinds of costs? Aaron or Rita, if you want to share your insights on that.
Well, we're a little different being a not-for-profit, so we actually have built-in funds that will cover that, where some public for-profit companies probably would have to go and get a whole lot more approvals to make it happen. So I think that's an interesting one, and it's one that you're going to have to do if you want people to be comfortable, I would assume.
Okay, Andrea?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll tackle kind of the diversity and inclusion thing. I mean, that's certainly something that's a big thing, big importance for our company. And we've created a committee and are starting to look into, how do we recruit a more diverse workforce? How do we, what do we need to do to train our employees on diversity and inclusion? And then once we hire those more diverse employees, how do we make them feel welcome? How do we make them feel like and they're included, and that we make people feel comfortable to share all of their ideas and opinions. So that's certainly something that we're focused on, that we didn't have in a budget for 2021, and certainly are having to make those adjustments to focus on those types of things.
Okay, so there you heard it, folks. There's unexpected budget costs that could impact hiring or might not, but they're definitely having to allocate assets to other priorities that have popped up. Okay, first question from Diane, who asked, what are the most significant issues that are rising from working remotely that need to be addressed?
I would say for us, it's really employee engagement. I think the more that this goes on, and life kind of takes over, it's much easier for people to be less engaged. So how do you keep a remote workforce more engaged? And we're having to look at some tools that will do that. So we've done things like, we actually started doing a weekly trivia back in March with our employees, where it was just a way for employees to stop work early and kind of hang out on a weekly basis and have a happy hour and do a trivia game. And it was so successful that we've continued that now that, not post-COVID, but now that things have started to open up a little bit, we're doing it on a monthly basis. We're also implementing new tools. We just rolled out a new system called 15.5. I don't know if any of you use that at your companies, but it's a tool that allows managers and employees to connect much more regularly, provide feedback, have more frequent check-ins. So those are some of the things that we're doing as we think about making sure that our employees stay engaged and motivated and connected to the company, even though they're not coming into the office every day.
Aaron?
We've done similar things with our new hires. We do quarterly kind of all hands for anyone who's been hired in a quarter, so that they get to meet other people who are coming in. We actually do a trivia game too, which it's funny to hear that it's worked well. People love it. I think just the being disconnected is one of the things you have to deal with. Does that affect your culture? Does it affect people's being a part of something, or are they just getting a paycheck now? Which I think on our campus, there was a lot more that we did to bring people together. They had ice cream socials. They had all sorts of stuff that always happened, that you would see people more frequently, which would open up conversations, that the collaboration that you just miss. Like, I could sit here and say, oh, I need to ask Andrea something, and I see her at the coffee bar and I ask her, whereas then I sit back a week later and say, I never asked Andrea because I never thought of it, because I never passed her in the hall. So I think we have to do a lot better job of that. And I think it's easy to do early on, but as you go into it, we did so many Zoom calls that people started getting Zoom fatigue. We were having town halls once a month, and people were like, hey, can we not do any more town halls? I know you're trying to bring us together, but we don't want to be together this much. So I think you can overdo it. So you have to, keep the temperature gauge and make sure that you're giving the right amount of what people want, and not just assuming they need more of it.
Gerald, are you there?
Yeah, go ahead, take it, Don.
Okay. Well, I was just, I think those are absolutely spot on. I mean, some of the bigger picture issues that I think about in terms of people I've spoken with tend to be, some of the mental health, to Diane's question, some of the mental health issues, if you will. I think there's certainly been a rise in the population's, challenges. And I think Andrea touched on maybe some of those, kind of the work-life balance. What day is it today? If you've got kids at home, going to school, things of that nature, and you're trying to work, being flexible. But I think all of those areas kind of feed back into that mental health piece, trying to keep ourselves mentally fit, in a period of, in some sense, relative seclusion compared to what we're all used to. And so I think, probably checking on employees, ensuring that they're doing well in an environment like this is very, very important.
Don, I think I saw a question in terms of benefits. I think it's too important to note that when smaller companies go all remote and not knowing what state your employee's on, there's different taxes for different states. We have people, we find out that they moved, didn't tell anyone, because why do they have to tell anyone? They're still on the same Zoom call, they're still on the other end of the email, and taxes don't get changed. So I think it's important to be ahead of that. If you don't have plans that cover all the states too, people might not know that going in, and those aren't questions that I'm not hearing people ask those a lot, so I assume they're not being asked, but I think they're important to think of, because it'd be terrible to move somewhere, get there, and then realize there's no doctors, or you're on a Kaiser, for instance. Kaiser isn't in every state. You have to go to Kaiser facilities, and if they're not near you, that might not be as an attractive thing as you thought it was. And don't get behind on your taxes, because that's a crazy thing to get back from too.
Absolutely. That's great. So Lauren has a question here. I'll take a shot at it, and then Aaron and Andrea, ask y'all for any comments that you have. How fast do you think unemployed people can find jobs during a pandemic? Lauren, I would tell you that it's going to take a little bit longer, but it's really going to be extremely codependent on your skill set. In my view, what you actually do. Let me give you an example. If you're a bioinformatician or a data scientist, there will be probably 5 or 10 jobs for that skill set at any one point in time. The demand for those jobs has not dried up at all. In fact, it continues to increase. So my answer to that is it really depends on the nature of your background and skill set, or anyone's for that matter.
Yeah, and I would piggyback on that too and say, I think a lot of it has to do with your flexibility. I think if you're open to maybe taking on a contracting role or consulting role that either could potentially turn into something else or just give you different experience, you certainly could find that a little bit more quickly potentially as well, and I think would help you get your foot in the door somewhere. So I think it just depends also as well how flexible you are and open you are. And maybe it's not the long-term right fit for you, but it's a chance to get your foot in the door somewhere or gain some new experience.
I think it's important. Never start looking for a job when you need a job. It's always easier to find one when you have one. And when there's more people looking, there's more volume, and it's all about relationships and networking. So start looking for the job that you don't want today.
Great advice. Absolutely. So Daniel has a question here that says, how are client interactions different now for consultants, considering they're not traveling to the client site? I'm going to be candid, Daniel. I don't have a real good feel for that because we don't recruit consultants per se. So I'll defer Andrea or Aaron if you all have any sense of that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's really no different than kind of our interactions with our employees, right? Everything has become virtual. Everything is remote. We've actually had to do some virtual client audits where normally we would actually travel to the client site and do a quality audit, for example. We've had to do some of those things virtually, where I think literally like they would take a camera around the facility and we would. We've tried to audit it that way. So, we've had to make some adjustments. Certainly we're not traveling to our clients right now. That started to open up a little bit. So we do have some client meetings on site, but for the most part, it's everything's really still virtual.
Yeah, I think now it's a little bit easier if you want to actually talk to and get a hold of someone. Obviously, you can't build the real rapport than when you meet with them or go out to dinner with them. But in some instances, I think it's been easier to have those conversations and more frequently when we're virtual. Long term, is it sustainable? I don't think so. I think you need to look in someone's eyes and read their body language and understand the situation better than looking at 30 people on a screen and trying to figure out who's reading their email and who's actually paying it. I think it's a hard game to play long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. So Aurelia Gross has a question here. Planning employee benefits for the 2021 year. What are the challenges given the outlook of the COVID-19 pandemic, given the fact that I guess it's still unknown? And this might go to an extent to Gerald's point about the testing earlier, but how are you all thinking about employee benefits at your organizations?
So I'll jump in real quick and let people know that I spoke to somebody about the testing, and if your doctor says you need to take a test, or if you walk into a clinic and say, I want a test, that's okay, and that's covered by health insurance. If an employer decides that, hey, we need to test everybody once every 2 weeks, that is not covered by insurance. And so that's the differentiator that I heard in the marketplace about how that benefit and how that is executed. Andrea and Aaron, I don't know if Andrea, I think you would know more than Aaron, because Aaron doesn't get into the benefits side from how benefits or out costs are done, but that's what I heard. So y'all can take the rest of the question.
Yeah, I mean, because it's really still optional for our employees to return to the office. I mean, we really have no more than maybe 10 or 15 in the office at any given time. I guess we haven't really thought that far ahead. If we get to a point where more people are in the office, or we feel like it needs to become a requirement, I guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But yeah, I guess it's really not something we've given a lot of thought to.
I think some of it will be plan dependent too. It's not the company can decide what their, Cigna is going to cover or not cover. I know at RTI, they're trying to do it where all employees can get COVID testing on campus and it'll be free. I don't know if they'll be able to do that. It'll probably also be based on availability. Since we're not the NFL, we can't get them 20 times a day, but maybe we can eventually get to that.
Yeah, so this one company is doing it every week, and because they asked that, they said they want to do it, the government, they were told that they would have to foot the bill. So versus, oh, your doctor said go get tested, or you're going into the hospital for an emergency, and before they treat you at the next level, they take your COVID test.
Yeah, I would assume if they let everyone do it, we'd have the same problem we have with toilet paper, and we would just run out so quick because everyone would be erroneously running out and getting tests every day. So
if I had to do a COVID test every week or every other week, I would just work from home. I wouldn't go in.
Yeah,
I heard it's not fun.
All depends on your nose.
Yeah.
I don't think cocaine addicts have problems with it.
Yeah, there was also another thing. Hi, this is Aurelia. Sorry to tune in. But I know that companies I've talked to from my friends, like their 401k match has stopped because of COVID to prevent layoffs. Has any companies that you know of have done anything else like that? I know Duke is a big one that did that.
I know early on they actually polled employees and asked them if they would rather have layoffs or stop the matching. I don't know how much it's going on. I saw a number of smaller companies who did it, and Don and Jarrell, I think we talked about this at one of our other meetings. It was people looked at it as a negative, and then once they actually interviewed the companies, it was the employee's decision to do it.
Yeah, I'd rather stop the match and keep the job. I think that, I don't know if everyone would agree with that, but I think a job's more important.
Depends if I'm losing my job or not, right?
Yeah, exactly. You want the job. Yeah.
Well, I know of two. I have two very good friends who both. One of them's not in our industry, but one of them is in cardiovascular surgery applications, and the company took as a publicly traded company, they took pay cuts to keep people gainfully employed at the company. Yeah. So, and then I have another friend who also took a pay cut, not in a life sciences company, whose company kind of embraced that idea of everybody, I guess, in some sense sharing in the pain. But, their intent is, I think, to recoup that as their companies get stronger. But, that has happened, and that will happen. And I can imagine a 401k plan, contribution match being suspended or whatever the legally is allowed to
Yeah.
be done there.